Welcome to the CXO and CHRO Walk into a Bar, where we share insights at the intersection of talent and revenue. Dive into a unique narrative with our hosts, Michelle Strasburger, the insightful CHRO, and Dominique Sanfleur, the visionary CXO. Together, they bring dynamic perspectives that ignite thought-provoking dialogue from the C-suite. Each week, join us for electrifying sessions that confront the very challenges modern CXOs navigate in today's fast-paced business landscape. When split-second decisions loom, must it be talent or revenue that takes the hit? Or is there a harmonious crossroad where both can thrive? Can we blur the lines between talent and revenue? In every episode, we provide executive leaders with 3 strategic takeaways, transformative insights that will propel you to master the delicate balance between people and profit. It's not about winners or losers, but crafting an environment where everyone triumphs. Tune in and step closer to redefining executive success.
Michelle,
we are back.
We are back indeed. Happy Tuesday. We're switching it up today. Doing a little pre-record.
We are pre-recording. We are traveling. My husband and I are traveling this week, so we're going to try out some new technology here to see if we can give everybody the same experience on a Thursday, but on a Tuesday for us.
There we go. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. We got this.
Yeah. So welcome, everybody. I'm Michelle Strasburger. I am the CEO of HR Rebooted, where we work with CEOs to create intentional cultures to help you scale without losing your soul.
And I'm Dominique St. Fleur, CEO of Intramark. We create a data layer on culture to help organizations identify hidden risks like productivity gaps and unwanted turnover.
And today we are talking about what story is being told about your organization. And this, I feel like we could go for longer than a half hour on this one.
You know, don't challenge me because, you know, I could keep up. I can keep up. This is a really, really good topic because, you know, it's all about what is reputation? What is your brand? You know, from an employee's perspective. We have some measures on what a company's brand is from a customer's perspective, right? We have a bunch of review websites and, you know, what the customer says, voice of customer. But what's the brand of the organization from an employee's perspective? Which, you know, we'll get into why that matters. But I think this is a pretty good topic for us to dive into.
It's an important topic. I think it's something that the C-level really needs to pay attention to, and it's, you know, they're crafting the message in everything that they do, even though they're not delivering the message out just to the world. So let's start with why. Why is it important?
So, you know, you know, I think the very first thing why this matters is what is your employer brand? Why that matters is going to impact recruiting and the quality of recruits that come to, you know, that come to your door. So there are kind of a few ways to look at this, right? One, the volume of people who will just apply to open roles at your organization, who would want to come to your organization in the first place, right? So more volume gives you more selection. You know, more selection allows you to be, you know, more picky, which, you know, allows you to pick the right person for the roles, which ultimately impacts how the organization moves and develops going forward. The second part to that is there are times where you can have volume but not quality, right? Also, it's the quality of the people that will be attracted to your organization, and I only imagine how many missed opportunities there are for some organizations, you know, where there's very high quality talent considering, you know, applying or putting their name in the hat for an opportunity at that organization, but they're shooed away from, you know, the employer reputation. And so that's one area where, you know, where this matters, you know, quite a bit.
I think that's huge. And when I was at an organization, I won't say their name, when I kind of walked into the organization, it was very sleepy. It was very gray. They were working on a project that was going to take 4 years. So most people didn't last the whole time to see the project through. And we went through a transformation on culture. And during that time when they were very sleepy, we had to use external recruiters to try to the market because we just weren't getting candidates that we needed to fill roles and quality candidates. And that there's this saying, like attracts like, right? And so if that's the culture of your organization, you're sleepy, you're not really moving fast, that's what you're going to attract in the organization. And we went through a whole cultural transformation. And we ended up saving the organization millions of dollars in recruiting costs because people were then knocking on our door and saying, I want to work for you. Because we went through this whole transformation and employees were actually sending a great message of like, wow, it's really changed and it really makes a difference. And I actually enjoy going to work now.
Absolutely. And you I wanted to expand on what you just said there, because I think it's super important. Like attracts like, there's that saying, A players attract A players, B players to attract C players. Right. And so do you have a reputation such that what's being told about your organization by A players, right, is attracting other A players? And if not, is it B players that are just going to, apply, and C players that are going to apply to open roles? So are A players able to attract other A players? I think is a very important factor in this, right? It's if you're not able to leverage your A players to attract other A players, then you have an organization with a lot of A players. And so, this is important because the story that's being told about your organization is going to really determine who comes knocking at the door. So I think recruiting and the headaches, right, that the downstream impact of that recruiting decision really matters, right? And so a lot of other headaches may come from that recruiting process. And so I think it's super, super critical to get that story, get a good story behind the organization's name.
Absolutely. And that downstream effect can be super positive if you've got A players, right? If you've got a culture that attracts that type of person, you're going to have quicker results. There's going to be more innovation. You're going to have, we talk about the intersection of talent and revenue, right? This is the intersection where you're bringing in excited talent, not sleepy talent, not B or C players. You're bringing in A players, and then that drives revenue.
100%. 100%. It's a gift that keeps on giving, right? It's looking at it from a customer's perspective, right? If we think about strong brands and how they impact the customer, let's say Apple or Coca-Cola, right? They almost do the selling for themselves, right? Of course, they're still advertising to, maintain the brand image, but the brand is just associated with trust. And so once it's that, if I need a computer, very short list is Apple, right? And so that kind of power behind a brand allows it just feeds itself. And so same way, on the employee side, if you look at your employees as if they were a customer as well, right? What is the internal brand that you're giving to that employee, that customer? What's that reputation? And it could feed on itself, right? It could feed on itself in the sense that they're in the environment, they got what they were sold, right? Good or bad or ugly, right? But they were sold an accurate view, and they're participating in forming, that experience going forward. And when they speak to other prospective recruits, they can also share that story accurately and confidently. So that story, how it's being told, is something that could feed itself internally. I have a few other categories, Michelle, but wanted to toss it over to you if other reasons why this is important.
Yeah, I think on the opposite side too, we saw the impact of brand recently, where Costco made a decision to not change their DEI policy and to stand by their DEI policy, and others did not. I think Target was one, and the sales dropped significantly. And so people are making decisions on where they buy and where they spend their money based upon your brand, and based upon your values, and not the values you're putting on the wall, but the values that you're showing by your actions. And I think that's the same thing with employees. Employees will influence customers. They will be customers. They will be referrals for you. But if they leave there on and they had a bad experience on their way out, or if they leave there because they're upset, they will not be a customer. They will not refer people. They will not help others buy the product. And people are making many more decisions based upon the wallet.
100%. And I wanna press on that too. I would say it's not even just having. They just don't. It's not necessarily, in my mind, they need a happy experience, right? The employee. I just think they need a fair experience. Oftentimes, what happens is, and what creates that quote unquote unhappiness isn't necessarily that they go in and have the best experience ever. Like, you can't do that for everybody. But what often happens is they're told one thing and they get something else. And I think that disconnect is where that quote unquote unhappiness lies. It's not just, it's not about, and I know you and I are on the same page on this. It's not about free pizza, every Tuesday or casual Fridays or ping pong tables. It's not that. It's selling an accurate dream, right? And I think we'll get into it, Michelle, just based on our previous conversations on the how to do this. But it's representing your culture accurately to those who have to make a decision on whether or not they want to sign up for it, right? Which includes, what's being done about it and the narrative thereof. But I think where a lot of organizations get tripped up is overselling what that environment is, what that culture is, what they'll be getting, in hopes to get the candidate. They get the candidate, they have a very disconnected experience, then they turn around and influence customers in a not so great way.
And imagine if they're customer service people you're hiring or salespeople.
Yeah,
it's an issue.
They will work against you internally, and that's internally and externally, while at the organization or even after. So it's not maintaining a perfect environment. You can be transparent that you don't have a perfect environment, and no one does. Be transparent on what's being done about it, but give them an accurate view. And I think where the trouble is so much more about, here's what they were told, here's what they got. You got to close that gap. You got to close that gap. And the one that gap is.
The study was years ago. It takes 3 weeks for somebody to decide whether or not to stay within the organization. And so if they're quickly seeing what they signed up for is not what they were sold, they're not going to stay long. And that might be a year, 6 months, 2 years, whatever, but they're not there 100%.
And what you mentioned about, how this impacts revenue, it's there's this reverberating effect. We can only imagine doing the math on this, right? It's not only losing that employee, right, when you didn't really necessarily need to. It's the cost of replacing that employee, but also it's the cost of that employee going off and sharing not such a great story with other potential employees and customers, and the cost of that, which goes far uncalculated. And so the cost of making a bad decision when it comes to being accurate about what your culture is, informing that story that is ultimately told about your culture or your organizations from the inside out, really, really impacts, in ways that I don't think a lot of organizations have taken the time to really calculate.
Yeah, let's talk about how we do that. And so, one of my favorite definitions of culture, and I'm not sure where I heard this, so I apologize if the person's listening and I didn't say their name, but it is what employees are saying about you at the backyard barbecue. So let's pretend a backyard barbecue at the bar, wherever they're having a conversation, they meet somebody new, or they're catching up with an old friend and they're like, hey, where are you working? What are you doing? And they start talking about it. And the friend says, what is it like to work there? It seems like a cool company. Whatever comes next is your culture, right? It's great to work there, or it's really tough. I have a tough boss. Nobody listens. There's bad communication. And so I think you need, and as an organization, we're not at the backyard barbecues. So we're not hearing that, right? In HR, we're not hearing that. CEOs are not hearing that. And so I think this is a great opportunity to use a product like Vibe at Intramark to kind of gather that information and to start. I love your phrase, like listening at the fringes, right? Listening at the edges to gather that information. Now you can't tell people like what would you say to backyard barbecue on an engagement survey because they're going to make something up. But asking questions using prompts over time to kind of piece that together, I think is super valuable. So that then you know what the message is, and then you can start having honest conversations with candidates and with employees about like, yeah, look, we don't have a perfect culture. Here's where we see the challenges, and here are the great things, right? We want to keep these and want to keep working on them, but here are the challenges, and here's what we're going to do about it.
100%. And I think that piece is super important, is not having a perfect story, because I don't think anyone can. It's, do you have an honest story, right? At the backyard barbecue, if that employee says, it's a tough culture in these 3 or 4 ways, but they're honest, and they're working on it, and I believe them. That goes way further than saying, kumbaya, it's the best place to work ever, and you don't have to worry about anything, because that's not believable either, right? There's always something in the middle, but what you want to hear is, it's not perfect, but I believe leadership. They were honest with me going in. I'm getting what they told me, and they're really working on it. And it's a place I can trust, right? As long as you can say, I trust. But thank you for mentioning Vibe, because there's got to be more of a more objective way to measure where your culture is today, objectively, versus what you espouse it to be. And there's usually a gap where you espouse what your espoused culture is, where it actually is, and leveraging Vibe to really understand how wide that gap is, what your culture actually is, what's the story behind it, and getting that accurate view. So folks like you, Michelle, can jump in and really advise CEOs how to create that intentional culture over time. And so first is you don't know what to fix if you can't measure it. One, measure it. And then bring in folks like yourself, Michelle, where you could really help the CEO develop that roadmap on closing that gap over time. So I totally agree with those points.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the cost of turnover now is around 3 times somebody's salary. And so that's a huge thing if you're going to not be honest. I know a lot of recruiters are going, but I have to sell them on the job and I have to sell them on the company. You're making me nervous, Michelle. No, you do, but you want to make sure you have the right person in the right seat. I think that's the most important thing. And so if that's the goal, then you have to be honest, and you have to, you don't have to sit there and say, we have a really horrible culture, don't come work here. But I think you can say, like many cultures, there are some really great things and there's some negative things. I've had candidates ask me about certain comments on Glassdoor. So they're seeing it. Mm. They're bringing it they're already looking at it. And so if you don't tell them the truth, they are going to be like, they're not honest. They're not transparent. They're not authentic. It's not a place I want to work. And so I think sharing that, and you can say, like, nobody's perfect, so let me give you the full picture, right? We have great flexibility. You can leave and work from home if you need to, if the kids are sick or whatever, but we're still growing and we've got some growing pains. And some of that is our communication channels are not perfect. And what that looks like is, the CEO does a town hall once a quarter, and then sometimes you hear things through email or other ways, but we don't have like an intranet where we pull people together. We don't use Slack or anything like that. So we've got some opportunities to improve there. And that might be a challenge when you're trying to get answers. Things might take a little bit longer than they normally would. I would be okay with that. Be like, fine, I can work with that. I'm going to get up out of my desk and go ask somebody a question. So I don't depend on email. So I'm like, all right, I can work in that environment. I think being honest is key to getting the right person in the right seat.
Exactly. And starting with being honest is also being accurate, right? Because some people, in an environment where a lot of different people may have, different views on what culture may be and their personal experiences, you want something that's a little bit more objective and communicated more broadly, right? Here's where our culture is, and having more of an objective process and being able to deliver that message. But to your point, Michelle, like it's no one expects a perfect exact. People will be suspicious that if you sell, yeah, nowadays, right? People are a little bit more on the cynical side, because there's been many cycles of selling dreams and not getting those dreams, and especially since things like Glassdoor out there, social media, the word's already out, right? And so the more honest that you can be to really give that person an opportunity to see if they want to self-select into that environment is really the best and most fair thing to do, and the best thing long-term for everybody. Because, you don't want to get someone who, thinks they're getting one thing or just kind of not a good fit. Really the highest performer for you, for that culture, could be that person who's that self-selects and can manage, around some of those growing pains as an organization grows. So I think honesty is accuracy. I think honesty starts with accuracy. Then from there, continuing to be honest about where your culture stands from a communication standpoint.
Let's talk about social media for a minute too. You brought it up. I think, what happens behind closed doors is not closed anymore. And so when an employee is terminated, quote unquote, wrongfully, or the process is just messy, or the communication from the CEO is less than stellar, or people get laid off via email, whatever it is, it's all going on social media. There have been recently multiple recordings of people being terminated, and we can talk about recording laws, which is another topic, but it's everything's out there. And so one of my favorite quotes, again, is, if you don't give people a story, they're going to make up a story, and it's usually not the story you want. And so I think that, the CEO, the CXO, the CHRO need to be in lockstep on what is the story that we want to have about our culture. We've gathered the information from Vibe. What is the story we want to tell people? And then how do we harness that and communicate it across the organization? So we're giving people, and I'm not saying you give them a story, you should give them truth, but help them with the language, right? Yeah, we know there's problems, right? Here are the things we heard. Thank you for giving feedback. Here are the things we're going to keep, and here are the things we're going to improve upon. And continually talking about that, and what improvements have we made? Continuous feedback too. Who's involved? Who could you contact if you have questions? The CEO should be the one. If there's an issue with the culture, come to my door. That should be the person that owns it. And so they have to own the message, and they need to be involved in it. It can't be the frontline people who are recruiting, just being the ones that are crafting the message. It needs to be something that's owned at the executive level.
There's got to be that consistent voice, that authoritative voice, and it's got to be a consistent voice. Ideally, one voice, right? That one ultimate voice that says, here's where we stand, here's how we make decisions, here are our values, and here are some examples of how we, I've demonstrated those values or helped to those values in tough or easy circumstances, wherever they may be. And I think you're 100% right. Nothing's behind closed doors, right? The concept, everything's out there. It goes to that saying of, don't do anything that you wouldn't be comfortable being on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Now it's like, don't do anything that you're not comfortable being on Instagram or whatever it may be, because it's everything's out there. And so making an attempt to hide or, massage, messages or all of that, more and more, this is not possible. And so I think that that transparency is going to happen for you. So you probably want to control how you want to control that flow, that narrative, right? So it's going to happen for you. But how can you control that, and control the story? So social media is a big one. People are recording things, that it's getting out there. And it's funny because it's not just senior leadership that are recording or that's, getting, those messages, but it's managers as well, right? And so if you have a batch of managers that are not representing your culture well, you kind of need to know about that before the world does, because there's a lot of assumption that's going to happen on whether or not that's the norm from one manager or not. And I think another thing that we touched on it, but I think it's worth doubling back on is the alumni. People who leave your organization will influence future customers. They will influence referrals. They will either be potential customers. And so what story, are people leaving your organization with? If it's not a great story, right, how do you think about engaging those people over time so that you can keep them updated on how things are evolving, post leaving, right? So you have a pool of people that have left your organization and they all have a particular view that may be stale over time. And so engaging alumni as your organization evolves so that that narrative continues to be fresh is an important factor, because again, alumni are going to be either future customers, influence customers, or influence referrals. And whether or not they do is going to be based on where they continue to perceive your organization to be and what stories they continue to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I would also take it one step further and say you should look at the whole employee experience and make sure that we are treating people and we have processes in place that foster that same culture and message throughout the whole employee journey, including, and we don't think about that with the employee experience, including when they leave and after they leave, right? And so I had a leader once say to me, we treat people so well coming into the organization, onboarding, they get gifts, they get a buddy, they get a tour, like all of the things. And we don't even know them yet. We're just putting faith that they're awesome and we're giving them an awesome experience, which I'm totally fine with. But on the other side, when they leave, we just shut the door behind them. There's nothing there. And so we're not giving them this experience. And they've given us 5 years, 3 years, whatever it is, of hard work. And they've been part of our team and part of our quote unquote family. And then we're just like, bye, you're not part of the group anymore. You're not part of the club. Have a good day. And so I think it's important to think about that. Are we giving somebody the same genuine onboarding experience throughout the whole employee experience, right? When they get promoted, when they take on a new position, are we giving them a great experience? Are we giving them a good experience in performance management? Even if their performance isn't great, they should still have a good experience with it. They should get the feedback. They should know the feedback. And then all the way through to termination and alumni needs to be a good experience. And it's hard to make terminations a good experience, but it's people have made a lot of mistakes. There's a lot of learning that you can find out there.
And I think you hit it on the head, Michelle. It's like something does not need to be positive to still be a good experience, right? There's a good way to terminate someone. There's a good way to do layoffs. There's a good way where people walk off with, gee, that situation sucked, but I was treated well. I was treated decently. That's all you need to do as an organization. Like, you need to just treat people decently. So, especially since that story, because layoffs and in parting ways, it's a reality of life, right? And people know that. But to touch on another aspect, Michelle, that on the alumni front, it's so important. And I like how you frame that, is people going out aren't treated the same way that they're coming in, and that red carpet treatment, it's just a slam door once they're out, no matter how much time they've given the organization. And I think that's such a huge mistake. One, just from a human decency perspective, but also from a dollars perspective, right? That alumni is going to influence the market. That alumni is there are things that are going to be said that's going to influence mind share that's out there. And it's an extension of your brand. It's an extension of your marketing. And so both to customers and prospective employees. And so treating that base and giving them some attention is very, very important. And there is a dollar, impact attached to that. So I totally agree on giving that some attention.
Yep. So it's important. It impacts your brand. You have to lean in and listen. You have to be honest and open, and you have to communicate regularly. I think those were our nuggets. Did I catch them all?
I think you caught them all. You know, and how they impact and why they're important. I think people don't necessarily think too much through, and so encouraging people to think through that a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Great.
Awesome.
Well, that wraps it up. We will see everybody next Thursday live.
You got it. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Thank you.
You've just experienced another episode of The CXO and CHRO Walk into a Bar, where we share insights at the intersection of talent and revenue. Thank you for joining us. Please join us next week at noon Eastern for more strategic content to help you scale your business. You can follow us on LinkedIn and on YouTube for additional content or episodes you may have missed. The links will be in the comments section. If you'd like more information or to schedule time with Michelle or Dominique, follow the link in the comments section to book time on their calendar. Until next week, cheers.